Marcia Daniels stood just outside the doors of Crestview National Bank early that morning. She felt a quiet thrill in her chest. Today she would meet with Tyler Reed, a young bank teller she had heard good things about. Marcia wore a tailored navy suit and carried a slim leather portfolio under her arm. She had arrived at the bank during a rare break between meetings for her company, Orium Tech. As the first black woman to lead a technology firm with more than 100 employees, she was used to commands of respect, but she also knew doors sometimes opened more slowly for women like her. She pushed open the heavy glass entrance and stepped into the bright lobby. Light streamed in through tall windows and reflected on the marble floor in patterns like silver ribbons. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee from a small kiosk to her left. Soft music played somewhere overhead, a tune meant to calm anxious customers. Marcia took a steadying breath and set her portfolio down beside her feet. She smoothed a crease in her blazer and checked her reflection in a mirror by the elevator bank. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly at the nape of her neck, and her red lipstick was fresh. A line of customers waited at 3 teller stations. Each station had a little plaque with the teller's name and title. Marcia's heart beat in measured pulses as she scanned the lineup. At the middle station, a young man in his early 20s tapped away at a screen. He wore a crisp white shirt and a skinny black tie. Above his head, on the wall behind him, was a large digital display showing stock market tickers and interest rates. That must be Tyler Reed, she thought. She picked up her portfolio and moved forward in the queue. When she reached the window, Tyler looked up and offered a polite nod. Marcia smiled and said, "Good morning. I'm Marcia Daniels. I have an appointment with Mr. Reed." She slid her company ID across the counter with her portfolio. The card bore her name, title, and a photo of her in a dark dress, standing in front of her office building. Tyler's expression stayed neutral as he studied the card. Marcia felt a quiet pride as she watched his eyes move from her name to the title Chief Executive Officer she had worked all her life to reach. This point, she grew up in a small town where factories closed and dreams often stalled. Her mother had taught her to keep her head high, even when people treated her as if she did not deserve to be there. Marcia kept that lesson close to her heart. Tyler's gaze did not linger on her credentials. After a moment, he reached out and dropped the card onto the floor, as if flicking a scrap of paper. The card hit the tile with a sharp clap. For a beat, the lobby was silent. Customers paused mid-swipe at the ATM. The soft music stuttered in the air. Marcia's breath caught. Tyler did not apologize. He did not bend to pick the card up. He kept staring at her as if nothing had happened. Marcia felt heat rising in her cheeks. She reached down, retrieved the card from the ground, and held it against her chest. She did not want to slam it down like he had. It would feel like feeding into anger. Instead, she tucked it back into her portfolio, her fingers brushing the leather where her initials were embossed. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. She kept her eyes level with his, refusing to show shock. Tyler's lips curved ever so slightly, but he said nothing. He checked his computer again, as if he had not heard her. Marcia realized he must be trying to ignore her, hoping she would. "Go away." She pressed her hands to the counter and leaned forward. "I'd like to speak with you," she said. Then something clicked in Tyler's mind. He cleared his throat and leaned down to pick up her card from the floor. He handed it to her without looking her in the eye. His hand did not brush hers. There was a moment when her fingers brushed the corner of the card. She wondered if he noticed the gentle pressure. He gave a small nod and turned back to his screen. Marcia straightened. She placed her portfolio on the counter again. She studied Tyler Reed, the way he sat there, tapping keys, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Around them, the other tellers continued their business, handing out cash, stamping deposit slips, greeting customers by name. No one moved to help or offered a glance. It was as if Marcia's presence had barely been noticed until her credentials hit the ground. She collected herself. She knew that the moment she lost her composure, she would give Tyler exactly what he wanted. She would become the angry woman demanding respect. That image would feed the story in mouths that preferred to whisper lies rather than hear truth. Instead, She nodded once and said, "Thank you." She picked up her portfolio, closed it, and carried it under her arm. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint, muffled chuckle behind her. She paused. Security guard at the entrance pretended to adjust his earpiece. A customer at the coffee kiosk bit into a muffin and turned away quickly. No one seemed willing to meet her eye. She walked slowly past the rows of seats in the lobby, each with a small magazine rack beside it. She thought of those racks, loaded with business journals and travel flyers each, one promising a better life. She felt the sting of the throne card, not because of the card itself, but because it represented years of struggle and proof of her hard work. She thought of her first job as a bank intern nearly 20 years ago when she handed out deposit slips with shaking hands. She remembered the older white men who spoke over her, correcting her pronunciation of financial terms. She had absorbed those lessons and rose above them, but the memory lingered like a scar. When she reached the front doors again, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. Tyler Reed sat behind his counter, his posture stiff. A new customer approached him with a check and a hopeful smile. Tyler returned the smile, and his world carried on. Marcia felt a surge of something. It was not anger. It was not revenge. It was steady resolve. She lifted her chin and stepped outside into the bright morning sun. The sky was a clear blue, and birds called overhead. She let the doors close behind her and took a deep breath. In that breath, she made a silent promise to herself and to every young woman of color who looked up at her with wonder. She would not let this moment define her. She would not let Tyler Reed define her. She walked down the sidewalk toward her car, her heels clicking on the pavement. In her mind, she reviewed what she would say to her team at Orium Tech. She would speak calmly, but she would speak plainly. She would explain that respect is not a privilege granted because of race or gender, but a basic right for every person who steps into that bank. And she would lead by example, showing that dignity need not bow to ignorance. When she reached her car, she paused at the driver's side window and looked at her reflection. Her face was composed and her eyes shone with quiet fire. She touched the glass with her fingertips and said softly, "Tomorrow, we begin." Then she slid into the seat, closed the door, and drove away, the sun glinting off the windshield. The city stretched out before her, full of promise and challenge alike. She felt ready to meet them all. Outside the lobby of Crestview National Bank returned to its usual rhythm. A man in a suit stepped up to Tyler Reed's counter, slid open the plate glass barrier, and asked for a deposit slip. Tyler smiled and reached for a pen. The digital display behind him scrolled interest rates. Marcia's ID sat on a small shelf behind him, its glossy surface gleaming in the fluorescent light. For now, it was just another card. But soon, it would become the spark for a story that no one would silence. Marcia Daniels stepped out of her car and into the cool lobby of Orium Tech's headquarters. The building's glass doors reflected the city's skyline, and she felt the weight of the morning pressing on her shoulders. She smoothed the front of her navy blazer and checked her watch. It was just past 10 o'clock. Her executive team would be waiting in the conference room on the 15th floor. She joined the elevator with 3 of her senior leaders: Carla Wong, the chief operating officer; Jamal Price, the chief marketing officer; and Daniel Ortiz, her legal counsel. They rode in silence as the elevator climbed. Carla tapped her foot nervously, and Jamal scrolled on his phone. Daniel adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Marcia watched them, aware of the tension in the air. When the doors opened, a long corridor led to a glass-walled room with a polished oak table. Around it sat 6 more team members: the head of human resources, the finance director, the public relations manager, and 3 vice presidents each had a laptop open and a notepad ready. The room smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet. A silver pitcher of water and glasses sat on a side table. Marcia took a deep breath and walked to the head of the table. She placed her portfolio on the polished surface and looked at each face in turn. She saw curiosity, concern, and a little fear. She had called this meeting at short notice. Now she felt the need to speak plainly. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was calm but carried through the room. I have something important to share. She opened her portfolio and reached inside. She held up her company IDA card with her name, title, and photo. She laid it gently on the table. Carla leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Marcia, what is this? Marcia straightened. This is my company ID, she said. I took it to Crestview National Bank today to meet with one of their tellers. She paused, letting her words settle. But when I showed it, the teller Tyler Reed dropped it on the floor. She watched her team's reactions. Some gasped softly, others exchanged glances. Daniel cleared his throat. Did he apologize? Marcia shook her head. No. He dropped the card, looked at me, then continued his work. I had to bend down and pick it up myself. She paused again, finding the balance between emotion and calm. I want to be clear. I did not lose my temper, did not use harsh words. I left without saying much more than thank you. But the message was clear. She let the silence stretch, and she said, I am here to ask, what do we do next? Carla answered first. We could issue a statement, she said. Response, call out the bank's behavior. Show that we will not tolerate discrimination. Jamal's hand shot up. But a public statement could go viral in a way we can't control. We don't want a hashtag storm that distracts from our business. We risk looking like we care more about drama than our work. Marcia nodded. I understand. We have a $2 billion finance deal in the works with Crestview. If we push back too hard, we could jeopardize those contracts. Daniel cleared his throat again. From a legal standpoint, we have grounds. The teller's action breached standards of professional conduct. We could pursue a formal complaint, maybe even involve regulators. But that would also delay the partnership. The finance director, Helen Cho, raised her hand. We lose that deal. The impact on our growth forecast is significant. We'll need to revise our projections, maybe cut back on hiring. Is this worth that risk? Marcia studied Helen's face. She knew the finance numbers well. She had approved growth plans based on that deal. But she also knew that respect and dignity mattered as much as profit. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered the feel of her ID card dropping on the cold tile. The flick of Tyler Reed's wrist had felt like a challenge not just to her, but to every woman of color who had struggled to prove herself. She opened her eyes. I appreciate everyone's honesty, she said quietly. Yes, that partnership matters. Yes, the numbers matter. But I also believe that how we are treated sends a message about who we are. She tapped the card on the table. If we allow this to slide, then we tell our employees, our customers, and the world that disrespect is acceptable if the price is right. Carla sat back, arms folded. So you want to push back? Publicly? Marcia shook her head. Not publicly yet. She looked at Daniel. I want us to send a letter first. A firm but polite letter to Crestview's board. We describe the incident. We ask for an investigation of their teller training, and we request a meeting with their CEO. We give them a chance to respond. Daniel nodded. We can draft a letter today and send it tomorrow. Jamal frowned. But what about the PR angle? We need to prepare for fallout on social media. If word gets out that we're pressing them, people will assume we're suing. Marcia smiled faintly. Daniel, please mark any legal references as confidential. Jamal, work with PR to draft internal talking points only. We do not want to leak this outside yet. Jamal pulled out his notes. Understood. I'll prepare a brief for employees. Explain what happened, why we're taking action, and reassure them we're handling it with care. Helen raised a concern, and if they ignore us, if they refuse to meet or apologize meaningfully, Marcia answered without hesitation, then we have to decide if we proceed with the deal. I would prefer to keep the partnership if they show genuine effort to address bias in their ranks. But I will not sign with a bank that tolerates mistreatment of any person. Carla leaned in. You mean you'd walk away from $2 billion? Marcia met Carla's eyes. Yes. A hush fell over the room. For a moment, only the hum of the air conditioner broke the silence. Then someone tipped the water pitcher. Glasses clinked as they were filled. Each person sat back, absorbing the weight of Marcia's words. Finally, the PR manager, Sophia Grant, spoke. I'll prepare draft messaging for our stakeholders once we have their response. We'll keep it tight and professional, Daniel added. I'll review the letter and coordinate with our outside counsel if needed. We'll send it on Orium. Tech letterhead, signed by you, Marcia. Jamal leaned forward. We should also prepare a fallback plan. Identify another banking partner in case Crestview doesn't cooperate. We don't want to be left without options. Marcia nodded. Good idea. Carlo worked with finance to compile a list of alternative banks. Look for those with strong diversity and inclusion records. We'll benchmark them against Crestview. Carla made a note. I'll have a preliminary list by tomorrow morning. Marcia surveyed the team. Thank you, everyone. Let's act quickly and thoughtfully. We represent more than profit margins. We represent values. Let's show the world that dignity matters. As the meeting concluded, team members gathered their laptops and notes. Sophia and Jamal lingered to clarify PR details. Daniel walked beside Marcia toward the door. She closed the glass door behind her and leaned against it. The hallway outside was quiet. Daniel stood beside her. Start drafting the letter now, he said. I'll send you a copy for approval within the hour. Marcia nodded. Thank you. And Daniel, let's keep this as low profile as possible until we know their response. He smiled. Absolutely. She looked out the window at the city below. Cars crawled along the streets, people hurried on sidewalks, and birds circled the skyscrapers. In that moment, she felt both the smallness and the power of her choice. An ID card on the floor had set into motion a chain of events affecting billions of dollars and millions of lives. She straightened her shoulders and took another breath. Then she walked back into the conference room to gather her things. She would return to her office, review Daniel's draft, and prepare to send a letter. That morning, as she left the 15th floor, she thought of the young women at Orium Tech who watched her leadership. She thought of the interns in the lobby, clutching their resumes. She thought of her own journey from a small town to this moment. She knew that respect once lost had to be fought for, because some battles mattered more than profit. Some battles were about who they were. Down the hallway, a janitor quietly picked up a paper cup someone had dropped. The cleaners below were already working to scrub the lobby tiles at Crestview. They did not know the story unfolding behind the polished glass. But soon they would. Here and when they did, they would see that a single moment of disrespect could light a fire in a woman who refused to be silenced. And Marcia Daniels, Orium Tech CEO, would be the first to fan the flames of change. The morning after Marcia sent the letter, she found herself in her office before the sun had fully risen. She sat at her desk, reviewing her email for any sign of a reply. The city outside her window was still quiet, but her mind raced with possibilities. Would Crestview's board take her concerns seriously? They offer more than a cursory apology? She tapped her pen lightly against the tabletop, willing the inbox to refresh. By 9 o'clock, her legal counsel, Daniel Ortiz, knocked on her door. He carried a manila folder and wore a look of concern. Marcia, he said softly, you need to see this? He opened the folder to reveal a draft response from Crestview's general counsel. The letter began with polite language, acknowledging receipt of her concerns, but quickly moved into vague promises to review training procedures at an appropriate time. There was no concrete plan, no invitation to meet, and no clear apology. For Tyler Reed's behavior, Marcia read the words carefully, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the same feeling she had when her ID card hit the bank floor. She looked up at Daniel. This isn't enough, she said. They are treating this as a routine HR matter, not as the serious breach of respect that it is. Daniel nodded. I agree. Can respond again, demanding a meeting with their CEO and a timeline for action. But if they refuse, we have to decide whether to continue the partnership. He paused, as if weighing his words. It might be time to start shifting our financing plan. Marcia closed her eyes, imagining the months of spreadsheets and projections she had built around the Crestview loan. She had rallied her finance team around the promise of low interest rates and flexible repayment schedules. She had celebrated in her office when the initial terms looked favorable. Now those models lay idle on her drive, gathering virtual dust. She opened her eyes. "Do it," she said. "Draft a firm reply. Tell them we expect to meet with their CEO within 7 days, and that we need a detailed plan for how they will. Train all frontline staff in inclusive conduct. If they cannot meet these terms, we will have to explore other banks." Daniel made notes and slipped the paper back into the folder. "I'll send it this afternoon," he said, "and I'll begin reaching out to alternative partners quietly." Later that day, Marcia gathered Carla Wang Herku, Jamal Price, the CMO, and Helen Cho, the finance director, in her office for a brief update. Carla looked tense, her brow furrowed. "I just got off the phone with Crestview's relationship manager," she said. "He said, our letter landed like a bomb, they're scrambling. He refused to name a date for the CEO meeting, but he offered to set up a call with someone in HR." Marcia shook her head. "That's not sufficient," she said. "We need to hear directly from the top. We need real commitments." Jamal leaned forward. "And if they refuse, we have tweets brewing already. Our employees are talking about it. Some are thinking about posting the story on LinkedIn," Helen added. "From a money standpoint, I've talked to Bank Alliance and Horizon Financial. Both have expressed interest in a $2 billion deal with our company. Their rates are a bit higher, but their diversity scores are strong. We could switch, though it would cost a bit more." Marcia listened, weighing the cost against the principal. She thought about the interns at Orium Tech who looked up to her, who believed their talent would always be enough. She thought of the young black women in the lobby of Crestview that morning who might hesitate before handing over their credentials. She realized that every choice she made rippled beyond spreadsheets. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Let's keep those options open. But let's give Crestview until next week to respond properly. If they don't meet our terms, we pivot immediately." The next day, Marcia spent most of her time on back-to-back conference calls. On one call, she spoke with her public relations team about how to manage employee communications. They drafted an internal memo that explained the situation was simple. Language and assured staff that the company stood for respect and inclusion. On another call, she reviewed with legal the phrasing of the next letter, ensuring it was firm but professional. In between, she waved 2 interns in the lobby, smiled at visitors, and posed for a photo with a group of young engineers celebrating their latest product test. By Friday afternoon, the week's tension felt like a tight knot in her shoulders. She headed back to her office after the last meeting, only to find Daniel waiting with fresh news. He closed the door gently behind her and sat across from her desk. "They responded," he said, "but not how we hoped." He slid a printed letter across the table. Marcia read it carefully. CEO, a man named Richard Hayes, wrote that he regretted Marcia's discomfort but could not commit to a CEO-level meeting. He offered a video conference with one of his senior vice presidents. He said the bank had zero tolerance for unprofessional conduct and would review training materials in the coming quarter. There was an apology tucked in the middle of the paragraph, but it read like an afterthought. She looked up at Daniel. "A video call is not the same," she said softly. "It is a barrier, not a bridge. He thinks this will quiet us down." Daniel nodded. "He's buying time. He hopes we will accept the half step and stay in the deal." Marcia tapped her pen on the desk. She thought of Carla's question about walking away from the partnership. She thought of the extra cost to switch banks. She thought of the look on Tyler Reed's face when he tossed her card. She made her decision. "Draft a letter declining the video call," she said. "Tell him we appreciate the apology, but need genuine accountability. We'll meet in person or not at all. And we need a real action plan with quarterly updates, starting within 30 days. If you won't do that, we will finalize the deal with another bank." Daniel nodded and left to handle the paperwork. Marcia leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the knot in her shoulders loosen slightly, replaced by a quiet determination. Over the weekend, she reflected on how this conflict had shifted from a single teller's act to a test of corporate values. She thought about her childhood, when her mother taught her to stand up for herself, even if her voice trembled. She thought about the first time she walked into a boardroom as CEO and felt the weight of every eye on her. She realized that leadership was not just about profits and growth. It was about setting a standard for respect. On Monday morning, she returned to Orium Tech's conference room to meet with Carla, Jamal, Helen, and her finance team. They had run scenarios for pivoting to Horizon Financial and Bank Alliance. They had detailed the costs and timelines. They stood ready. Marcia spoke with quiet strength. "We will send the letter declining the video call today," she said. "And we will inform Crestview that our deadline is this Friday. If they do not comply, we close their file and open discussions with our alternatives." There was a moment of silence as her team absorbed the decision. Then Carla spoke. "I support this. It's the right thing to do," Mal added. "Our employees will see that we act on our words." Helen nodded, her face determined. When the meeting ended, Marcia walked back to her office. She opened the blinds to let in the morning sun. It felt warm on her face. She picked up her phone and sent a brief message to her board of directors. "We are taking a stand. We'll update you by Friday." She set the phone down. Her assistant knocked and handed her a fresh pot of coffee. She took a sip and let the smooth warmth fill her. Outside her window, the city moved with its usual energy buses rattled. People hurried across intersections, and birds raced the traffic lights. In the lobby of Crestview National Bank, a new teller greeted customers with a practiced smile. Tyler Reed sat at his station, preparing for his shift. He glanced at the digital clock above him and thought about the email he expected any minute, wondered whether he had slowed a CEO's plans or simply triggered something much bigger. And somewhere above, in a tall tower of glass and steel, Marcia Daniels pressed send on a letter that would define her company's future. She watched the cursor blink in the empty email field for a moment, as if savoring the quiet before impact. Then she closed her laptop and stood, ready for whatever came next. ChatGPT said, She arrived at Crestview National Bank's boardroom. Just as the early morning light began to filter through the tall windows, Marcia Daniels stood in the polished hallway for a moment, smoothing the front of her blazer. Today was the day she carried in her hand a thick folder with final documents from Orium Tech, ready to sever ties if needed. Inside the room, a long mahogany table stretched almost its whole length. Round it sat Crestviews, senior leaders, some in crisp suits, others in conservative dresses. At the head of the table, Richard Hayes, the bank's CEO, tapped his pen against the wood. He looked guarded but attentive. Marcia took a seat across from him and nodded in greeting. "Thank you for meeting with me in person," she said, her voice steady. She placed her folder on the table. "Appreciate you making time today?" Richard cleared his throat. "Of course, we value our partnership with Orium Tech and want to find a way forward." Marcia picked up her folder and opened it to a marked page. "Over the last week, we have exchanged letters and emails. I laid out our concerns about the teller, Tyler Reed, who dropped my company ID on the floor without apology, your teams. Responses have been vague and lacking in concrete action. Today I am here with our final position." She set the folder down and leaned forward. "We asked for 3 things. An in-person meeting with you. A clear plan for inclusive training of all frontline staff within 30 days. Quarterly progress reports shared with Orium Tech. Unfortunately, your replies promised only a video. Call with a vice president, a review of training in the coming quarter, and no firm timeline. That is not sufficient." A murmur ran around the table. Richard's assistant jotted notes. He looked at Marcia, his forehead creasing. "We feel that our existing policies already address bias and respect. Our Human Resources Department conducts regular training, and any lapse is isolated." Marcia nodded. "If that is true, then let us see the evidence. We requested your training materials, attendance logs, and plans for improvement. You have not provided those. You offered only vague assurances." Richard sighed. "We cannot share proprietary training content, but we can assure you we take this seriously." Marcia held his gaze. "Then understand our decision. Orium Tech will end our agreement with Crestview National Bank. We will finalize financing with another institution by the close of business today." She paused, letting the words settle in the room. Some board members shifted in their chairs. Richard's eyes hardened. "You're walking away from $2 billion? Over one teller's mistake?" Marcia pressed her palms to the table. "This is not about dollars. It is about respect. God, if you cannot guarantee that every person who walks through your doors is treated with dignity, then you do not deserve our business. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Finally, Richard rose and circled the table to stand beside her. Marcia, please. I value this relationship. I can call Tyler Reed and issue a formal apology, and personally oversee a thorough review of teller conduct. Marcia shook her head. It is too little too late. Our executives have already signed the documents. They await your countersignature to complete the termination. I'm sorry it has come to this. Richard's shoulders slumped, dumbed a folder of his own and slid a pen across the table toward Marcia. I just sign here to pause the paperwork. Give me 10 days. Then we meet again. Marcia eyed his hand, then set it aside. No. My team prepared everything for today. We will not delay. The files are ready. My board needs confirmation by 2 p.m. that Crestview is no longer our financer. He picked up the pen himself, but did not move. Our teams have worked for weeks on these terms. Marcia leaned back in her chair. Then you know we gave you time to respond. You declined to act. So we act now. Richard's eyes flicked to his board members, who sat stiffly in their seats. One woman cleared her throat and glanced at her notes. A man tapped a paper folder. They all looked uneasy. He set the pen down. Very well, he motioned to his assistant. Prepare the termination documents. Marcia closed her folder and tucked it under her arm. She stood, smoothing her skirt. She gathered her papers, then faced Richard one last time. Thank you for your time. Outside the boardroom, she waited in the hallway as the assistant finalized paperwork. The sound of a printer rattled behind closed doors. Marcia watched her reflection in the polished wood paneling, strong, composed, and firm. A few minutes later, the assistant emerged with a single sheet of paper. She handed it to Marcia. It bore the bank's official letterhead and a bold heading. Notice of termination of financing agreement. It was dated that morning and signed by Richard Hayes. Marcia unfolded the paper and read it once more. She nodded, thank you. She turned and walked down the hallway, leaving the assistant peering after her. As she reached the bank's entrance, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. The lobby bustled with customers, but something felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if the building itself knew a shift had occurred. She stepped outside, into the warm sunlight. A light breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from a planter near the entrance. She tucked the letter into her bag and straightened her shoulders. Later that afternoon, back in her office at Orium Tech, Marcia gathered her executive team. Carla, Jamal, Helen, and Daniel sat around the conference table, their faces expectant. Marcia placed the termination letter on the table. I have it, she announced. Crestview agreed to end our agreement. They signed the termination this morning, Helen exhaled. That was fast. Marcia nodded. They wanted to avoid public fallout, I think. But they also realized they could not meet our demands. Jamal leaned forward. What about the new bank? Do we finalize with Horizon Financial or Bank Alliance? Carla opened her laptop. I ran numbers this morning. Horizon's rate is slightly higher, about 0.25% more in interest, but their diversity certification is top tier. Bank Alliance is closer to the rates we had with Crestview, but their headquarters are farther away and their branch network is smaller. Marcia tapped her finger on the table. I choose Horizon. I want a partner whose values align with ours. The room filled with nods. Daniel added, I have the draft agreement ready. We can sign by tomorrow, and funds will be available next week. No gap in financing. Carla smiled. I'll set it up. Marcia looked at her team and felt pride swell in her chest. They had stood firm together, had risked millions to protect principles. She thought of her board's reactions, some nervous, some supportive. Ultimately, they backed her decision. Later that week, Orium Tech issued a brief press release. Orium Tech announces new financing partnership with Horizon Financial, reinforcing our commitment to values of respect, diversity, and inclusion. The release did not mention Crestview or the reason for the change. It focused on the new collaboration. Within hours, social media buzzed. Industry blogs noted the shift. Some quoted anonymous sources saying Orium Tech had wanted more from Crestview on diversity training. Others praised Orium's stand for principles. The story spread beyond tech circles into business magazines. Marcia did not chase the headlines. She let Jamal's PR team handle the public messaging. Internally, she sent a candid email to all employees, a short note explaining the decision and thanking everyone for their support. She invited questions and organized a town hall meeting the following week. When that town hall took place, hundreds of employees filled the auditorium. Marcia took the stage and spoke from her heart. She told the story of the Tellers Act, not to shame an individual, but to illustrate why respect matters. She shared the lessons they learned and the steps they would take, including working with Horizon to co-host bias awareness workshops. The audience listened in rapt silence, then broke into applause. In the months that followed, Orium Tech's partnership with Horizon Financial thrived. Reports showed on-time funding, smooth transactions, and a shared focus on community outreach. Most important, Marcia noticed something shift in her own company's culture. Employees felt empowered to speak up when they faced microaggressions or disrespect, knowing they would be heard. One afternoon, walking through the lobby, Marcia passed a new teller from Horizon Financial who had set up a pop-up desk to welcome Orium employees. The teller greeted her with a warm smile and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Daniels. How can I help?" "You today?" Marcia felt a quiet satisfaction. She knew that respect was more than polite words. It was consistent action. She hoped that every person who stepped into that bank would feel it. Because dignity was something you earned, and something you promised to protect, no matter what the cost. Marcia Daniels walked into her office that Monday morning with a sense of calm she had not felt in weeks. The sun shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm squares of light across her desk. She paused for a moment, resting her hand on the polished wood, thinking of how far she had come since that first encounter at Crestview National Bank. In her mind, she replayed the sound of her ID card hitting the cold floor, the silence that followed, and the look of surprise on Tyler Reed's face. That moment had set everything in motion, leading her to stand up not only for herself but for every person who deserved respect. She arranged her papers and glanced at the framed photo on her desk. Her and her team at the ribbon cutting of Orium Tech's new research lab. The lab symbolized growth and innovation, but the story she had just lived through was about something deeper than technology. It was about values. She thought of the interns who looked up to her, of the employees who asked questions at the town hall, and of the young black women who saw themselves in her journey. She felt a gentle swell of pride. Her calendar showed a meeting with Horizon Financial at 10 o'clock. She had invited their head of client relations, Marcus Lee, to discuss how Orium, Tech, and Horizon could work together beyond financing, perhaps, in community programs or joint diversity workshops. She wanted to turn a challenging moment into an opportunity to build something positive. When Marcus arrived, he greeted her with a firm handshake and a warm smile. He said, "Marcia, it's a pleasure to work with you. I admire the stance you took. It shows leadership." Marcia thanked him. She could feel the sincerity in his voice. They talked about process improvements and co-hosted events. They spoke. She realized that true partnerships were built on shared principles. After Marcus left, Marcia gathered her leadership team for their weekly meeting. Carla Wang opened her laptop and shared a report on the new financing arrangement. The numbers looked solid, with only a slight change in interest rates. Helen Cho, the finance director, noted that the extra cost was offset by goodwill and stronger community ties. Jamal Price, the marketing officer, showed social media metrics. Engagement was high, and customers praised Orium Tech for its values. Even industry analysts were noting the company's stand on respect. Marcia listened, pleased. She then said, "I want us to harness this momentum. Let's plan a series of workshops in collaboration with Horizon Financial. We can invite small business owners and community leaders to discuss respectful service and bias awareness. This can be our chance to spread change beyond our own walls." Her team nodded, excited by the idea. That afternoon, Marcia took a stroll through the company's innovation hub. She paused at a workstation where two interns were testing a new prototype. They looked up and greeted her. One asked, "Ms. Daniels, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story at the town hall. It made me feel safe to speak up when something doesn't feel right." Marcia smiled and said, "Thank you. That is exactly why I shared. Never doubt that your voice matters." The intern beamed and Marcia felt warmth spread in her chest. Later, she reviewed messages from clients. One email stood out. A small nonprofit had read about Orium, tech shift, and wanted to partner on a scholarship program for women in STEM. Marcia felt a thrill. She forwarded the message to Carla and added, "Let's explore this. It fits perfectly with our mission." As the day wound down, Marcia returned to her desk. She reflected on her own journey. She remembered growing up in a small town, watching her mother juggle two jobs to keep the family afloat. She remembered her first day at the bank's internship program, how nervous she was handing out deposit slips. She remembered being overlooked in meetings. Her ideas passed over until a man repeated them. Each experience had shaped her resolve to demand respect not just for herself, but for others who followed her path. On her way out of the office, she stopped by the lobby. A group of new hires stood with their orientation leader. She approached them and said, "Welcome to Orium Tech. I'm Marcia Daniels. I want to tell you that here, we value each other's worth above all else. Never hesitate to speak your truth." Their eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. One young woman said, "Thank you, Ms. Daniels. That means a lot." Marcia nodded and walked on, leaving them smiling. That evening, Marcia sat at her kitchen table with her husband Marcus and their 10-year-old daughter Lela. They talked about the day's events. Layla asked, "Mom, why did you have to leave that bank? Couldn't you just forget about it?" Marcia took a moment before answering. "I could have," she said. "But I knew that if I stayed silent, then I would teach you that it's okay. To accept disrespect, well, that is not the lesson I want you to learn." Lila nodded thoughtfully, and Marcus reached over to squeeze Marcia's hand. Later that night, Marcia tucked Lila into bed. As she kissed her daughter's forehead, she thought of the future of a world where respect was a given, not a privilege. She whispered, "Sweet dreams, my love. Always stand tall." Back in her office the next day, Marcia found a small package on her desk. Inside was a notebook titled Voices of Change, with blank pages and a note from her team, for your thoughts, plans, and the stories yet to be told. She smiled and ran her fingers over the cover. It was a symbol of new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Orium Tech and Horizon Financial launched their first joint workshop in the city's community center. Business owners, bank employees, and civic leaders attended. Marcia opened the event with a short speech, sharing the story of the Teller's Act, not to blame, but to illustrate why empathy and respect must be at the heart of service. She then invited participants to share experiences and solutions. The room buzzed with energy as people spoke honestly and listened with care. After the workshop, a teller from another bank approached Marcia. She said, "Your story moved me. I've seen things like that and didn't know how to address them. Now I feel empowered to speak up." Marcia smiled warmly and said, "Thank you. Change begins with each of us." That evening, Marcia updated her Voices of Change notebook. She wrote ideas for more events, plans for mentoring programs, and thoughts on policy improvements in banking. Each page filled with possibilities. She felt energized by the impact one person's choice could have. Months later, at Orium Tech's annual company retreat, Marcia took the stage to share the year's achievements. She spoke of record revenue, innovative projects, and the new partnership with the nonprofit. But the highlight was the section on culture, improved employee satisfaction, scores, stronger community ties, and new initiatives born from a simple act of standing up for respect. She ended her talk by saying, "In leadership, profits matter, but people matter more. When we choose dignity over convenience, we shape a future that honors us all." The audience rose in a standing ovation. As she stepped off the stage, Carla hugged her, Jamal patted her back. Helen raised a toast. Marcia felt tears of gratitude well up. She thought of her mother and how proud she would be. She thought of Leela and hoped she would carry these lessons forward. That night, as she closed her eyes, Marcia reflected on the journey. A single moment at the bank had triggered a transformation, both for her company and for herself. She realized that true leadership was not measured by deals closed or profits earned, but by the courage to uphold values, even when doing so came at a cost. She knew that challenges would come again, but she felt ready. In her dreams, she walked through a grand hallway lined with doors. Each door bore a name: respect, empathy, inclusion, dignity. She opened each one, and light poured out, illuminating the path ahead. She woke with a start, the image vivid in her mind. She smiled, knowing that every day offered a chance to open another door. And so, Marcia Daniels continued on her journey, leading Orium Tech with steady resolve, championing respect in every boardroom and lobby, and inspiring others to know this simple truth that dignity is not given, it is chosen, protected, and celebrated by every person brave enough to stand tall.